Welcome, welcome, welcome. Come on in. Today is Saturday. It is May 29th, I think. Maybe May 30th. I think it's May 30th. It's a Saturday. It is the last Saturday in May. So here we are. When we started these live videos, I promised that I would come on once a week during the month and to just talk to you from my heart about the topic from On the Beam podcast. This was a challenge of my husband to get out and to tell a little bit more about my story, but just to be able to share from a different place. If you're following the podcast, you know that there are some stories there. It is meant to be empowering, but it's not a lot of personal stories. So this is an opportunity for you to get to know the woman behind the podcast just a little bit more. This month, as you know, we are still in the month of May, and it has been an amazing month of, at least through the podcast, of talking about mental health awareness. It is such an amazing time just to be able to come together and to build each other up, especially within the mind. There are so many battles that go on within our mind each and every day. So many things that we fight against each and every day. And it's hard to just collapse it into 1 month of information. And so you very well may hear me talking about mental health as we go on throughout the year. But with the climate of the nation, this has been an increasingly sensitive time, and there's a lot going on in our minds, a lot of questions about our place as people and where we are and where our value is. And as I'm thinking about that, I'm reminded that we're not just forced in these mindsets based on what's going on in our social setting, within our social constructs, within our community settings, but we deal with stuff everywhere we go. We deal with stuff at home. We deal with stuff at work. We've dealt with stuff within our childhood. We deal with stuff within our peer relations. Sometimes even within our marriages. We go through so much mental torment about who we are and what we're supposed to do. And a lot of that comes down to impact our mental health. It impacts our emotions. It impacts just our thought processes. And every time our emotions are impacted, every time our thought processes are impacted, it impacts our ability to fulfill our life's purpose because we get stuck. And so my desire is to help get us unstuck. It's to help get us moving in the right direction. There's so much purpose inside of you. And so my goal is to allow you to begin to just understand some of the things that are taking over and that are preventing you from being all that you were called and created and designed to be. And so this week in the podcast, if you have not checked it out, go on over to Anchor, go on over to Spycast, Google it, find it, go to this page, go on my page, go on Instagram, find it. It is called On the Beam Podcast. It's been an amazing couple of months for me making these posts, but this month in particular is super dope. You don't want to miss it. You don't want to miss it. It's going to start getting you thinking about the things that you may have been feeling that you couldn't really put the finger on. You couldn't really articulate. You didn't realize what was holding you back. So go back and check them out. So this week we were talking about the shadow mentality, living in somebody else's shadow. I don't know how many of you are younger siblings, but sometimes being a younger sibling makes you feel stuck in somebody's shadow. You're always trying to live up to your older brother or older sister, always trying to maybe outdo them, always trying to live up to your parents' expectations based on what that person said. Maybe that person was so amazing and so incredible that you have been working to be somebody else. You were working to be that same incredible person, which is not who you were called to be. Doesn't make you less incredible. It just means that you should be maybe incredible in a different area. But sometimes we get so stuck in trying to be that person and living in that person's shadow that we don't take a moment to figure out who we were created to be. Maybe that person wasn't incredible and maybe they made a lot of mistakes. And so then you spent your life living in the shadow hoping that you superseded the expectations so that people didn't see you as they saw that older sibling. So maybe it had the reverse effect on you, that you were trying to overdo or override your older siblings' quote unquote mistakes. And so you were pressing towards something, a mark that wasn't really meant for you to try to carry. You were carrying weight that wasn't yours in the first place. That's a possibility of a shadow mentality. But maybe the other side of what we were talking about is rejection. And there's so many ways that rejection can take over our minds and take over our lives, that maybe there was something about rejection that was in your childhood or that was in your later life. Hi, I'm Pat. Thanks for joining. That helped shape who you were, that made you want to turn away, or that impacted your mental psyche in some type of way. I don't know. So you got the shadow mentality and rejection, and that's what we've been talking about. And I wanted to share a story about me and some rejection that I felt a couple years ago that really started to weigh me down professionally. And it's part of the story that led me to Jacksonville. So some of you have heard this before, some maybe not so much. But I had gotten to a point when I was working in Tallahassee where there was a specific job position that I wanted, and I started applying for the job. Once I made the decision that this was the position I wanted, I started to apply for positions. I started to really put myself out there. I started to tell people that this was the position I was seeking. I started to put my resume out there. I even interviewed for positions. And when I say that I was interviewing across the state of Florida. I was in Tallahassee and I interviewed down in Miami, which was about a 7-hour drive. I remember driving down to Hialeah, I think that's how you pronounce it, down in South Florida, spending the night with a law school classmate, and then getting up the next morning, doing the interview, driving straight back to Tallahassee after that, and immediately following like a 10-minute interview, a 7-hour drive for a 10-minute interview, and getting back, going straight to Bible study, and going on with my day from there. I remember applying for that same position in Orlando, which was about 4 hours from Tallahassee. This one was a little bit of a different opportunity. I requested a video conference, so I was able to do a video interview that I thought the interview went well. I thought the Miami interview went well. Guess what? Neither one of them hired me. There was another position in the Gainesville area that I applied for, which was about 2 hours from Tallahassee. I applied for that one, never heard back. I just got an email rejection. And so I was feeling like I was getting rejection after rejection, and it made me think, well, if this is the position that I believe I've been called to, why are these doors being shut? Why is this such a difficulty for me to obtain? Because if something is really meant for you, I don't believe that you have that much struggle. But what I've had to learn is that what was a perception of rejection, which is what this post is about, is that a perception of rejection is not actual rejection. And so we have to be very careful. We're taking on this weight. We're allowing these things to take over our minds. It allowed me to begin to second guess myself as these rejection letters were coming in. These rejection emails were hitting my inbox because I was, checking them every 5 minutes to see what was coming in. It began to make me question, am I supposed to be in this field? Am I supposed to be applying for these positions? Am I good enough? Will I ever be good enough? Why won't they accept me? Why don't they like me? What is it that I'm lacking? And I began to question my skills. I began to question my value. But how many of us know that their understanding of the position and what they were looking for at the time, it didn't match what I was able to provide at the time. It didn't make me any less qualified. It didn't make me any less amazing. It just meant that I wasn't fit for that season. And that was back in 2016, 2017. And so now that I'm in 2020, I'm now beginning to recognize that it's okay, and that it wasn't rejection, it just wasn't the right timing. And earlier this week, I was doing some study and came across Ecclesiastes 3:1, which is the scripture that tells us that there's a time and a season for everything under the heavens. And so when we begin to reshape our mindsets, and when we begin to recognize that timing plays a key part in everything, that hopefully that will minimize our perception of rejection, and understand that actual rejection is just a perception of rejection, and that we have to wait for the right time. And so a lot of times there's a cultivation period. There's a process that we need to walk through and understand that when we walk through a thing, it will prepare us for the next thing. And instead of internalizing something wrongfully, let's begin to reshape our minds. One of the things I talked about in the podcast towards the end of the podcast was there was a story that I referenced about Ezekiel, and I was talking about the parable of the dry bones. And there's a dream that he's having, and he's in a desert of dry bones, and the bones aren't doing anything. They're literally dry. They're dead. There's nothingness. And he cries out to the heavens and say, will you speak to these bones? And God speaks back to him in this dream and says, you speak to those bones. You revive those bones. And he did so. And and I'm paraphrasing, so you can go and check it out. But when he comes, when he does follow the word and he does prophesy to those dry, dead bones, those bones are revived. Those bones live again. And so my encouragement today is to reconsider the perception of rejection, recognizing that it could be a timing issue, but also recognizing the power that you hold within the mindset and within this sphere of rejection is that we can speak things into existence. So in the same way that I mentioned me feeling devalued and me feeling insignificant and me feeling unworthy, those are words that I get to speak and to prophesy into my own life. But now it's time to reshape. Now, it was always time, but now I understand the need to reshape and to categorize my words. And so no longer will I speak unworthiness into myself, but instead I'll speak life into those dead situations. I'll choose to speak affirmations over myself. I will no longer wait for the steering committee to affirm me and my qualifications. I will no longer wait for other people to tell me that I'm qualified in this position. Yes, by being hired, that is a confirmation of something, but it doesn't automatically mean I'm unqualified because I wasn't a right fit for them. And so I have to begin to prophesy into my own dry bones. And so my encouragement is, as you're thinking about how to speak life into yourself, think about affirming yourself. And one of the things I would encourage us is, as we're thinking about how to deal with the battlefield of our minds, is to think about the things that are tormenting us and how do we reshape it. So when it's negative, let's reshape it into a positive. And one way to do that is, I just mentioned, is affirmations, and by speaking positive affirmations over yourself each and every day. And so maybe you look in the mirror every day and say, I am beautiful, I am worthy, I am enough, I am qualified, I am good enough. And just remember that we are enough. The scriptural basis for the podcast is Psalms 139:14. For I give you praise that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. That is such an amazing concept, and that's where these affirmations come from. When we understand that we're amazing just the way we are, yes, we can grow more. Yes, we can be stronger. Yes, we can read more and grow more. We're never going to be everything that we were meant to be, but we keep striving, But when we recognize that we're in a good place just the way we are, and where we don't allow the shadow mentality and the perception of rejection of others to take over our minds, we're going to be some amazing, amazing people. We can begin to create communities that are so much different than what we are, but we've got to begin speaking this stuff into ourselves first and foremost. And so I'm encouraged that as we're wrapping up this Mental Health Awareness Month, that we're going into a new season, that we're going into a new month with a different mindset, with a better mindset of knowing how to speak life into our dead situations, knowing how not to misjudge a situation, knowing how to place ourselves and to speak value over ourselves, even when nobody else does, is recognizing that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, that we are beautiful just the way we are, that we are powerful, that we do have a voice, that we were called for a greater purpose, that there is something coming on the other side of us. And while we're sitting here, I'm not sitting here by myself, so Oliver's sitting out here. This is actually the first time that he's been with me as I recorded a live video, and so I asked him if he would pop on at some point, so he's gonna join us. And I just thank him for this time, because for so long I felt like I didn't have a voice. And for so long, I didn't feel like I had anything to say, and so I didn't share. So I would blog, but I wouldn't share the blog. Out of 4 years of blogs, I might have shared 40 blogs, but there's definitely more than 40 posts. And so these lives are outside of my comfort zone, but it allows me to address those fears. The same thing that we're talking about. We're talking about not allowing fear to take over the mind. And part of that is recognizing the things that are holding us back. We started off talking about depression, and then we talked about anxiety, and then we talked about shame and guilt. And now we're talking about shadow casting and the perception of rejection. All of these things begin to bind us up and to hold us back from being who we're called to be. And it's time out for that. It is time to walk forward into our purpose, into our destiny. And so I commend you. I thank you for challenging me to do this very thing. But, I know that you have some wisdom to share too in terms of mental health. I know that this isn't my story alone. And so I want you to be able to share anything about, as we're closing out Mental Health Awareness Month. So as you think about mental health awareness, what would you want to encourage people? What is something that you wish somebody would have shared with you along your life's journey that you want to make sure somebody else knows?
Not to be quiet. Because you are suffering from something, whatever your something is, whatever symptoms you may have, reach out to somebody. And don't, from the male's perspective, don't feel that it makes you soft, that it makes you a punk, that you're not handling your business. Because I use the airplane analogy. When you're on a plane, for those that have ever flown before, and the stewardess stands up front and she says, in the event something happens and the mask drops down, you put your mask on first. If you don't put your mask on, and they say don't worry about, even if you're with your kids or you're with your family, your first inclination is to help them. But if you don't help you, if you don't put your mask on first, you are going to be unable to address the issue, problem, concern that you have, and you'll be ineffective to those that you look out for and those that depend on you.
That's good. That's real good. I think that's something that I've heard it, and it's probably the hardest thing for me. And you actually just asked me this Friday about taking care of me first. And I think for so many of us, we take care, especially those of us who are wives, mothers, servants, leaders, we take care of so many other people and so many other tasks first that it's hard to consider myself first. Like, is that really a thing?
So the question I have for you is, why is it hard for you to consider yourself first? It goes back, I think it goes back to something that you saw growing up. And those that, in anything that you struggle with, I think a lot of times, I won't put a percentage or a number because I haven't researched it, it's just my personal opinion. I think a lot of times, the things that we struggle with, the things that we don't like to deal with, or the things we do well or don't do well, are based upon the things that we've seen or did not see and have found our own way to deal with them from childhood to adulthood to where we are now.
Gotcha. Well, clearly we've got work to do. So I have encouraged you on the podcast to do a mental health self-awareness check. This is the final part that I'm pushing out in terms of this mental health self-awareness assessment. We've talked about assessing where you are with depression, assessing where you might be with anxiety, assessing where you could be with shame and guilt, and we're defining a difference. We've talked about today thinking about where you might be with the shadow mentality versus this perception of rejection. There were some other examples of the rejection that was discussed on the podcast, so go check it out. And then, rounding off with self-care. Because if you lose yourself, first of all, you're no good for anybody else. If you don't focus on you first, then you're at zero good for anybody else.
gotta say it with confidence. Like you hesitate. You gotta say it with confidence.
Well.
It's a work in process.
It's a work in process.
Work in progress.
But that's such a critical piece. So think about that. Really spend time thinking about where do you fit. Hey, Stacey, where do you fit in the priorities in your list of daily tasks? Where do you put yourself?
That's good.
Where do you put yourself? And that is definitely a key when you're doing your mental health self-awareness assessment is where do I put myself? Because if you put yourself last, imagine how that's going to affect your mental psyche. Imagine how that's going to weigh on you when other things are coming after you. When you're dealing with raising children, when you're dealing with a spouse, when you're dealing with work, when you're dealing with serving in ministry. All of that weighs on you, especially if you have no foundation of where you are and who you are. So,
be honest.
Yes.
Be honest. If you're not going to be honest with anybody else, be honest with you.
So, and Stacey, we were actually just talking about that. I don't think I fit. I actually wrote out a list of areas that I work on right now, and I started with myself, and then I began to write down the other areas. I wrote family. I wrote Regroup for Change. I wrote Marquita Green Ministries, which would be Life on the Beam stuff. I wrote Father's House Kingdom Ministry, which is my church, and then I wrote TBM, Teresa Burton Ministries, which is a separate ministry that my pastor has. Every single category had a list of stuff under them, all except the one that said me. So I'm saying this to you all, but I'm also reminding myself.
Sometimes the best therapy for ourselves is to hear ourselves say it.
So we have to figure out how, it won't necessarily balance out. And I'm not saying that my list has to be as long as every other list, but it shouldn't be blank. And so that's my priority over the next several days, is to figure out how, not weeks, not months, the next several days, is to figure out how to add something to my list so that everything else is sustainable. Because with this being blank, that won't be sustainable over time. It may feel okay today, but over time, it's all going to falter out. Something is going to go wacky and out of balance. So we're working on that.
So it sounds like that you want your listeners to hold you accountable?
Sure.
She wants everybody listening.
Exactly. Burnout.
Even those that are going to catch this on the replay, to listen and hold her accountable. She said the next couple days. Let's be specific. With today's Saturday.
Well, I have to have something in there by June 1st because I'm goal driven and I'm driven by months. And June 1st is on Monday, and I can't go into a new month without having goals, right? And so as I'm creating goals for everything else, I will create a goal for myself.
You hear it. So y'all can follow up on Monday. And y'all said y'all wanted to do a live about it? Is that what? Oh, no, I didn't.
This is my last live.
I thought I saw that.
He is really challenging me and pushing me, y'all, trying to get me out of my comfort zone. I don't know about these whole live things. I like being behind the scenes. Please do. I like being behind the scenes. I like being behind the camera where you can't see me, behind the microphone, even behind the pad and paper. But this is outside of my comfort zone.
You did well. 5 lives in the course of a month by yourself?
I think it was only 4.
Oh, well.
But then I did have the workshop I did for Girls Who Brunch Tour.
Okay.
That was live.
All right.
I had to smile the whole time. That was hard.
You did good.
Well, we are pulling you out, Stacey. There's too much in you to be behind the scenes. So, we need to check in anyway, because I need to know what's happening, what's going on with you, especially with your mentor program. Yeah, we talked about that way back when. So.
She just called you out, Stacey. She did. On her live.
Anyway, love y'all. Thanks for joining. Thanks for tuning in. If you are catching this on the replay, #replay, gang gang.
Just #replay.
Hashtag replay. Let me know. What you are going to be doing, where you prioritize yourself, and if you want any more of those tips that we were talking about with the mental health self-awareness assessment, let me know. It's really just a self-check. It's not like a written assessment. But don't forget to check out On the Beam podcast. It is on Spotify. It is taped on Anchor, so you can find it on Anchor. It's really good. It's not long. The sessions they're good. Messages are only 12 to 15, 16 minutes. So
they're really good.
Drive on your way to Walmart. Check it out. Let me know what you think. They drop every Tuesday at 7 a.m.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me, good sir. And thank you again for challenging me and pushing me.
Cool.
See y'all soon. Peace.